Hey, ladies and gentlemen. This week, chapter 4, we're going to talk about some of the theories as it relates to juvenile justice, which you should remember some of this stuff from criminology class. And it's along the same vein. When it comes to all of the different stuff, we're going to talk about the classical school, the positive school, the choice theory, the routine activities theory, deterrence theory, some of the biological theories, the psychological theories. Um, you have to remember, even though we understand that juveniles aren't the same, there are some similar motivations as it relates to criminality. Sometimes they're amplified, sometimes they're muted, versus the adult application thereof. But we need to remember that they exist for a reason. So first off, we're going to start with the actual definition of theory, which is a formalized idea or set of principles that attempts to define an explanation or define and explain a phenomenon. Cesar Beccaria, who lived from 1738 to 1794, believed that people are naturally hedonistic and that they operate on this thing called the hedonistic calculus, which is a balance between pain and pleasure. People want to maximize pleasure and minimize pain. And it's that understanding that we do things because we want to get the most pleasure for them while avoiding at the same time pain. It's like a cost benefit analysis. You look at the cost versus the benefit. What is this going to cost me? If I commit a crime and I get caught, what are the potential consequences? If I don't commit a crime and I don't get caught, then I don't have to be concerned with getting caught, actually. Or if I do commit a crime but I don't get caught, what are the benefits thereof? So the hedonistic calculus is the formula you use in your head about, is it worth it? Is the action worth the potential consequences? And it requires this acceptance of free will, which is the ability to make a choice among various alternatives. So you can do A, you can do B, you can do C. Now the outcome, if you do A, the potential outcomes are A, B, and C. The potential outcomes for if you do B, they're A, B, and C. The potential outcomes for C are A, B, and C. So you have to kind of measure, which has the best potential outcomes, which has the worst potential outcomes, and I want to avoid those because those are negative. But I want the most positive outcome, so you kind of figure it that way. And that's what the classical school of criminology did. It focuses on the offense committed rather than on the offender. And it looks just at the offense. Murder, rape, embezzling. It looks at the offense on what should be an appropriate punishment for the commission of a certain crime. And understand the classical school was operating under the what we refer to as lex talionis, which is let the punishment fit the crime, an eye for an eye, so to speak. And that goes back to biblical times, when it talks about an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. And basically what that means is if you stole something, you had to give something commensurate back, or if you stole something, you lost your hand for it. If you continually bore false witness, you would lose your tongue, because that was the offending appendage, so to speak. But there's this concept that punishment, again, you're looking to balance, let the punishment fit the crime thing. But you want that punishment to be swift, certain, and severe. You want it to be swift enough that people can correlate the crime with the punishment. You want it to be certain, to be decisive, that this is the punishment you will get for commission of this crime. and also severe, but not too severe that it keeps people from doing anything. But you want it severe enough to work as a deterrent or something that prevents people from committing crimes. And like this is not a criminology class, so we're going to kind of go through these pretty quickly. Like I said, this should be refresher for you guys because I had quite a few of you in the criminology class. Anyway, so we're going to move on to the positive school. Of course, you know Cesar Lombroso, who's the founder of the positivist school of thought, and it required the application of a scientific method to study the phenomenon, and it increased the influence of the positive school of thought because they were using the scientific method. Test and retest. You come up with a theory, either support the theory or deny the theory. It's literally what we use when we write dissertations. With my dissertation that I wrote, I had to come up with a theory that applied to the situation, and it was either founded or unfounded, which in the case of my research, it was unfounded. It didn't. Anyway, but it has a focus on rehabilitation over punishment. Remember, the focus of the classical school was punishment. This focus is on rehabilitation. So we're moving from a focus on the offense and punishment to the offender and rehabilitating said offender. And it uses determinism, and it focuses on the offender to that the course of a person's life is determined by their actions. And so we can rehabilitate them to change their course, their life course. And that's the idea behind determinism. Then when we talk about choice theory, choice theory is kind of it's part of the neoclassical school, and it's a throwback to the classical school in that, people operate on choices. Individuals commit crimes because they make a rational choice to do so. And they conduct a risk benefit analysis. Sometimes it takes them, 2 seconds. Sometimes it takes them 20 years, but they weigh it out. And this is they were questioning the rise of the positivist school, and going back to that offense based instead of that offender based. And I don't know if you guys have ever heard this before or heard this terminology, but it's called the pendulum ideas uh, behind crime. And it covers the whole of the criminal justice system, not just criminological theories. But if you think about it, it's going from one to the other and then back again, which is literally what we see here. We start with the classical school, we swing the pendulum, it's all about the offense and punishment, and then the pendulum swings over to the positivist school, which is all about the offender and about rehabilitation. Well, now we're swinging back over in that pendulum, because pendulums go back and forth. Now we're swinging back over to that neoclassical, and it's about the offender, or I'm sorry, it's about the offense again, and that risk benefit analysis. Remember, I just talked about that with the classical school. And a lot of this was caused by a significant rise in crime in the 60s and 70s. So you have, the classical school, which pretty much dominated from the beginning of written history through the late 1800s, early 1900s. And that's that swing of that pendulum over to the positivist school. Now it's the 60s and 70s. We've swung back. We're seeing significant rise in crime, overall crime rates, but especially violent crime rates. And so we're back to, it's not about the offender, it's about the offense. And, during this neoclassical school rise, there was a lot of attacks on rehabilitation. Hey, it's not working. Um, And an example of that, and how politics can play a part, um, and this relates to this course because the DARE program, okay, the Drug Abuse Resistance Education Program, we have discovered through 40 years, 50 years now, worth of data and significant evaluations thereof, that DARE doesn't work. It does not work to prevent or inhibit drug abuse among youth. And yet DARE is still taught. It is still one of the most dominant drug education courses in schools today across the United States. It still receives millions of dollars of funding every year, even though we know it doesn't work. But it's a political minefield to try to stop the DARE program. Because, oh, do you not care about the kids? And da 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 da. No, we just know it doesn't work. So why would we keep doing this? That's literally the definition of stupidity. But we do it because it's what's expected. So understand that politics does play a part in all of this. And I bring that up because it talks about the routine activities theory, which the routine activities theory requires three components: a motivated offender, a suitable target, and the absence of a capable guardian. And there are offshoots to the routine activities theory. In fact, one of those is the theory that I used for my dissertation, which was the situational crime prevention theory, which required manipulation of an environment in order to prevent crime from occurring. So, and again, that's that piece there, that suitable target and the absence of a capable guardian. Well, if you manipulate the environment, you can increase guardianship through ability to see for long distances by removing blocks like shrubbery or large trees, stuff like that. Excuse me. And it prevents a suitable target by allowing people to, not walk down a dark alley versus, doing so. So it's that kind of stuff. And then we have the deterrence theory. And again, remember I mentioned deterrence just a few minutes ago when I was talking about punishment. You needed severe punishment to act as a deterrent to future criminality. And there are two types of deterrence. You have general deterrence and specific deterrence. General deterrence is to be generalized to the populace, meaning it's going to prevent everybody from committing crimes because they don't want to incur this punishment. Whereas specific deterrence is specifically aimed at the offender themselves to keep them from committing future criminality. Your book says it this way, that general deterrence seeks to discourage would-be delinquents from committing delinquent acts because of the threat of punishment, whereas specific deterrence is a sanction imposed on adjudicated delinquents in order to prevent them from continuing to commit delinquent acts in the future. And again, it's that idea that juveniles are committing crimes because they choose to do so, and it's based on perceived risks and benefits of committing that delinquent act. So there are certain assumptions related to the deterrence theory. First is that the individuals are rational actors. Is this always the case? Well, we know that it's not. We understand due to physiology that the frontal lobe, the prefrontal cortex, which is where executive function occurs, this part of the brain, doesn't develop until the mid to late 20s in some individuals. And that alone can prevent rational choice. However, if you know that what the punishment is for the crime, again, back to that idea of swift, severe, and certain, you know that if this, then this, if you commit this crime, then this, and you get caught, this will happen. And juveniles should view these risks as unpleasant, meaning, back to that hedonistic calculus, that pleasure, pain, balance. And so for deterrence, again, to be effective, the sanction must be swift, certain, and severe. Again, right back to the classical school, right? That's why this is called the neoclassical school. there are some automatic failures. Again, juveniles aren't rational. Not always. Okay, they're not always not rational, but juveniles are less often rational than the rest of the population. And they don't necessarily perceive the risk of apprehension and punishment to be high. They think they're going to get away with it. And so that creates some failure in the deterrence theory, especially as it relates to juveniles. So now we're going to move on to the biological theories. We've talked about, the classical, the positivist school, and the neoclassical school. Now we're going to move on to these biological theories. And it was birthed out of, let's swing the pendulum back, it's back to the positivist school, right? So biological theories came out of the positivist school. And there's biological differences that exist between juveniles and adults, as well as delinquents and non-delinquents. And there's this morphological approach that criminals are viewed as biologically inferior to non-criminals. And going back to Lombroso, he came out with a theory of the atavistic man, that there were, quote, born criminals that they had certain physiological features. They had a protruding brow, a squared jaw, excessively hairy, very large. Now these are male, right? They had a flattened nose, and we realize today how ridiculous all of this sounds. But it was this idea that there was a specific physiological and appearance differential between your criminals and non-criminals. And there's that whole atavism, that it was a throwback to what they called the early man. Again, here comes Darwin into this. And Cesar Lombroso, he believed that the brains of criminals were biological throwbacks to primitive man. Think Neanderthal. And that they were more aggressive and savage. These are the people who were committing violent crimes. Their skulls were either noticeably larger or smaller than what was considered normal. Of course, I'm firmly of the belief that normal is a drier setting and only that. They had large protruding jaws, canine teeth, high foreheads, flattened noses, and fattened noses as well. They had deep, close-set eyes, especially large or small ears. So it's extremes, very long arms, very long legs, and their face was asymmetrical. So basically, if you were born with a birth defect, Lombroso would tag you as an atavist. And then you have William Sheldon's somatype theory. He had the endomorph, the mesomorph, and the ectomorph. The endomorph had a soft, round, and fat body structure, body composition. The mesomorph, their body structure is muscular, firm, and strong. And the ectomorph was thin and frail. And so which do you think he tagged as the violent criminal? That's right, the mesomorphs. Your ectomorphs were your thinkers. They were the ones who would be embezzling. And the endomorphs, they're the ones who are going to be lazy. So, and then you have the twin study by Christensen. Carl Christensen studied mono and dizygotic twins. Remember, monozygotic, they come from the same egg, so they're identical twins. Dizygotic, they're fraternal twins. And they have 2 eggs, 2 sperm, versus the monozygotic single egg, single sperm. And he found the concordance rate that the delinquent behaviors were similar regardless. That they were higher in identical twins than in the fraternal twins, meaning that monozygotic twins, identical twins, were more likely, if one was a criminal, the other one would also be a criminal. Dizygotic twins, remember, the fraternal twins, these are nothing more than siblings born at the same time, that they only had a 12% rate of concordance, meaning that they were, only 12% of them, that if one was a criminal, the other would be a criminal, whereas it was 35%, or, over a third of the monozygotic, the identical twins, that if one was a criminal, the other would be a criminal. And, they went further with it in different theorists studied adoption, and when the biological and adopted parents had no criminal record, only 13.5% of the adopted children had a criminal record. But when the biological parents had a criminal record, but the adopted parents didn't, it was about 20% for the adopted children to become criminals. Now, when the biological parents didn't have a criminal record and the adoptive parents did, about 15% of the adopted children had a criminal record. But when both the adoptive parents and the biological parents had a criminal record, about 25% of the adopted children had a criminal record. This relates to the old nature versus nurture argument. And if you've been around the criminal justice field for any length of time, you've heard this argument. Is it nature or is it nurture? Is it because they were born this way or is it because they were raised this way? Is it based on, their biology or is it based on their environment? Well, this study shows both. But it does show that in the absence of criminal records among both biological and adoptive parents, they had the lowest rate. But the ones who were both the biological and adoptive parents, they had the highest at 25%, a quarter of them. So now we're going to move on to this biochemical and neurological approach. And now it focuses on biosocial factors that lead to delinquency. And those biosocial factors, that's the interaction between biological and social factors that lead to delinquency. Nature plus nurture, to put it another way. And again, we have this previous study that showed that nature plus nurture equals higher rates of criminality, right? Now, so what are some of the biochemical factors? Well, excuse me, dietary influence. High diets of high fat, high sugar, high processed foods equaled more criminality. Fetal alcohol syndrome or drug abuse by mother during pregnancies, or prenatal drug use. We understand that what you put in to a pregnant woman goes to her baby as well as to her. That's why there are babies that are born addicted to illegal narcotics, illegal substances. And fetal alcohol syndrome, they show developmental delays, a lot of different things. And you also have hormones. We all know hormones can make you crazy. Hormones affect us in a lot of various ways. I'm an older female, and so there are hormonal changes that are going on in my body that are making it difficult for me to lose weight, that make it difficult for me to sleep at night, that cause hot flashes, bunch of fun stuff, all good times. But they do control bodily functions within the central nervous system, and reproduction. It also influences. Cortisol is one of those hormones. It's the stress hormone. Is released into your bloodstream when you feel the fight or flight impulse, and that can affect us. And what it affects is the autonomic nervous system, because this controls the body's involuntary functions like blood pressure and heart rate. So what happens is you sense the adrenal stimuli, which is that fight or flight response, and it releases cortisol to help the body cope with the stress. Well, what it also does is it leads to weight gain in the center of the body. But they can also cause learning disabilities in babies and fetus that are born, and it can cause them to have learning disabilities. ADHD is one of the most prevalent. And we see mothers that smoke during pregnancy, that their children are significantly more likely to be diagnosed ADHD. And that's, inattention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity. Remember, impulsivity is one of those risk factors that, inability to stop oneself from doing something that one knows one should not do. And, and a talk about criminological theories would not be complete unless we mentioned Freud. And Freud said that mankind was made up of three parts: the id, the ego, and the superego. The id is one's personality that's composed of the unconscious biological and psychological desires and instincts. The ego is the part of the individual that represents the identity of the individual and their actual behavior. And then the superego is their conscience and moral character. Um, and, anything that influences any of these can cause criminality. And according to August Acorn, an uncontrolled id is the basis for delinquent behavior. That's that unconscious biological and psychological desires. Eric Erickson argued that delinquency occurred because of an underdeveloped ego. He said that they had this underdeveloped personal identity, and so they were more likely to commit crimes because they didn't know who they were. And you know that we had these defense mechanisms to deal with conflict. We have repression. We just repress it, ignore it, make it go away. Denial, never happened. Displacement, oh, it wasn't me. Regression, I'm this baby. Reaction formation, I don't know what you're talking about. And rationalization, oh, well, I did it because of this. So these were all defense mechanisms in order to deal with conflict. Think back to an argument you've had with someone and you deflected. Oh no, I didn't say that. That wasn't me. If I did, it was only because you did. And again, there's that rationalization. So you have a lot of different defenses when it comes to conflict, and individuals who, according to some theories of crime, individuals who commit crimes do so because of their inability to process conflict, and so they tend to go with the flow. Now, Kohlberg presented these 6 stages of moral development. The first stage is punishment and obedience orientation. One of a child's first words is no. Why? Because that's the word they hear so much. No, you can't have that. No, don't touch that. No, don't go there. No, don't mess with that. No. And so they learn it. And so they say no a lot. If any of you have ever been around a toddler, you know this. No is their favorite word. And then that hedonistic orientation, that's step 2. Ooh, that pleasure pain principle. Remember, I want more pleasure than I want pain. I've already learned obedience orientation, and so now I want to do what I want to do, but only if it makes me happy and feels good, and it makes me avoid pain. Then you have the interpersonal concordance. That's where you create these relationships outside of your family, the people you choose. And then you have the law and order orientation. This is where you learn, okay, this is legal, this is not legal, this is what I should do, this is what I shouldn't do, kind of thing. Then you have your social contract and your legalistic orientation. You should do this because of this. This is the expectation for you. And then lastly is the orientation to universal ethical principles. These are the people who they're going to do what they're going to do because they have a sense of moral obligation to it. Now, one thing to remember when we talk about some of this stuff is antisocial personality disorder. And as of October, excuse me, psychopathology, sociopaths, and psychopaths all fall now under antisocial personality. And some of these characteristics, they repeatedly perform acts that are grounds for arrest. They commit criminal acts repeatedly. They're deceitful. They'll lie. They're impulsive. They're irritable and aggressive. They're reckless. They have a reckless disregard for the safety of themselves or others. More importantly, they have a reckless disregard for the safety of others. And sometimes they have a high regard for personal safety and a complete opposite response to the safety of others. They're consistently irresponsible, meaning they don't meet deadlines, they don't do what they're supposed to do when they're supposed to do it, and they lack remorse. They don't feel bad for it. And lastly, let's talk just a sec about learning theories. You have classical conditioning, modeling, and operant conditioning. Now, classical conditioning, that is a theory that states that people learn by associating stimuli with certain responses. Um, and I don't know if you guys have ever heard about this, but video games, they've discovered they have the same addictive qualities as cocaine. It works the same way on remapping the brain pleasure sensors that cocaine does. And so it makes them feel good, so they want to play more games. That's classical conditioning. This makes me feel good, so this stimulus makes me feel good, so I'm going to do this. This stimulus makes me feel bad, so I'm not going to do this. Then you have modeling. That's that learning theory that people learn by imitating the behavior of others. This is what we use for our children. This is why you see little kids when their dad or the male person in their life is shaving. You see a little kid on the stool in front of the mirror trying to shave. That's modeling. They're imitating what they see. And then operant conditioning is a learning theory that states that people learn based on the consequences of their behavior. If I touch a hot stove, I will get burned, kind of thing. That's operant conditioning. So, ooh, bad consequence. Don't want to do that. But it also works for good consequences. So I make good grades. My parents are proud. I get stuff or I get acknowledgement. I get recognition. I get positive feedback. So I want to do that more. So it motivates them. So basically, it's about the motivator in operant conditioning. So I hope this helps you guys with your stuff this week. And thanks for joining me. See you next week.